Hi, I'm Carissa Highlander. I'm a rising junior here at Mary Wash. I'm a biomedical science major and a chemistry minor. This summer I'm working with Dr. Davis Oldham on tuberculosis research, trying to find new drugs for the antibiotic-resistant strains. Thank you to all the donors who are supporting student research here at Mary Wash.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Life After COVID. We're in end of week 3 here of our 5-week course. Happy to have you all back with us yet again. We have an exciting presentation for you tonight. I'm really excited to welcome one of our superstar faculty, Dr. Sean Humphrey from our Department of Economics, to talk to us about cash transfer programs, COVID-19, and issues of inequality, another big social issue that we've seen come out of the pandemic. So before we get started here, just a reminder that you have 2 ways to communicate. You have the chat box down below, and you also have the Q&A box. If questions occur to you during the presentation that you'd like to ask of Dr. Humphrey, please enter them into the Q&A box, and you will have the opportunity to upvote the questions that you like. So take a look at those questions and give a thumbs up to the ones you want to see asked first, and those will rise to the top. If you're having technical issues, then by all means, enter it into the chat box. That'll come to me and to my colleagues, Dr. Betsy Lewis and Dr. Anand Rao, and we'll try to take a look at that and figure out what the problem is and get that corrected as quickly as possible. So happy to welcome to Life After COVID, Dr. Sean Humphrey. Let me turn it over to you, Dr. Humphrey.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me today. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and share my screen and get going. And someone said hey to me, so hey, I see you in the chat. All right, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, and I think we are good to go. Hold on a second. All right, so thank you all for having me today. So once again, the title for today's talk is COVID-19 Cash Transfer Programs and Inequality. But before we get into any of those details, what I want to do is I want to talk about poverty for a bit. So let's go ahead and talk about poverty. So, what is poverty? So poverty is homelessness, malnutrition, lack of sanitation, and inadequate access to safe drinking water. Poverty's physical consequences include fatigue, susceptibility to disease, and early death. Poverty is also emotional distress, depression, and anxiety. For these reasons and many more, poverty has been likened to a trap. And those who are caught in poverty trap, well, they're the poor. And the poor, they're socially excluded, politically powerless, and vulnerable to crime, corruption, and coercion. The poor have limited access to education, technology, and markets. Overall, the poor are marginalized with few, if any, economic opportunities to improve their standard of living. Now, having said all this, I don't want to portray the poor as powerless. Those who are poor are resilient, creative, persistent, and hardworking, and in a different context outside of their community in which they are ensnared in a poverty trap, there's no doubt that they would excel in ways that we understand excelling in our commercial society. Now, not to say that the way that we define excelling or understand excelling in our society is the only way or the best way, but the idea is that yes, if given a different context, given a different institutional framework in a market, they would find themselves working out, seeing a material prosperity. Now, reviewing what poverty is and the poor and their conditions, my intention here is not to encourage you to jump on a plane and parachute into a poor community to try to end another person's poverty. The poor are not in need of our saving. Indeed, when we do try to do this, it's usually not a good result. I mean, if you were to sit back, well, how many of us have actually ended our own poverty? Well, probably none of us. And for that reason, why would we assume that we know how to end another person's poverty? So, if after this talk, if you feel motivated to help those ensnared in poverty trap, that's awesome. But what I would do is I encourage you to check out the Sidekick Manifesto before you take any sort of active steps to actually try to end another person's poverty. So the Sidekick Manifesto is a global movement that my students and I started here at UMW. It has gone viral, and it sort of has reshaped the way that young people, millennials, things like that, and even practitioners in the nonprofit space actually engage people that they're working with who are poor. So if you are, you can take a look at the Sidekick Manifesto, and if you are still encouraged, then just reach out to me. Anyways, let me restate my point. Once again, the poor are not in need of our saving. They're in need of better public policy. And one of those better public policies is cash transfer programs. So What's a cash transfer program? So straight up definition here is it is a direct transfer payment of money to an eligible person. And that direct transfer of money can go directly into their bank account, or it could be a mobile phone transfer. Now, there's two types of cash transfer programs. There are conditional cash transfer programs and there are unconditional cash transfer programs. Sorry, that's a lot of saying right there. So let's go back to conditional. So in terms of conditional, as you would expect, the transfer payments themselves are conditional upon the recipients. If they're eligible, they're expected to take particular action. So for example, if you are eligible for a conditional cash transfer program, you may need to enroll your child in public school, or you may need to get your child inoculated against certain disease. All right. If you do those things, and if you have evidence of doing those things, then you get the transfer payment. All right. The second type is unconditional. And as you would expect, these are transfer payments that go, there's no conditions attached at all. If you are eligible for the program and if you breathe, you get cash into your bank or you get a mobile phone deposit. Now, with the onset of COVID-19, countries all over the world have turned to cash transfer programs as a way to quickly provide economic relief to households. So today we want to do is that we want to explore and debunk some of the myths surrounding these cash transfer programs. However, before we do that, what I want to do is I want to compare and contrast the economic lives of the poor with our economic lives from those of us who are in the United States. Now, I know people may be outside the United States who are listening to this or watching this. But myself, I'm in the United States, and I try to anchor it in sort of my experience, my economic life, to sort of make the comparison a little starker. All right, so let's start off talking about expenditures. So what are the different types of expenditures that the poor confront? Well, they have to pay for food, they have to pay for home repairs, medical expenses, clothing, they pay for entertainment, they have to pay for rites of passages for their kids. So in other words, graduations, baptisms, first communions, things like that. They have to pay for education for their kids, they have to pay for visitors when visitors come to their home, they have to pay for the food and things like that. They also got to pay for funerals, all right? So when it comes to you and me, what types of expenses do we confront? Well, we have to pay for food, we have to do home repairs, medical expenses, clothing, entertainment, rites of passages for our kids, education, visitors, and funerals. So essentially, when it comes to expenditures, the poor and you and me, we're the same. We confront the same set of expenditures. Now, let's go ahead and talk about income then, all right? Now, in terms of current income, now I'm going to think about this in terms, I'm going to give you an example. So let's say you're going to take a bath. All right. So if you're going to go take a bath, you turn on the water spigot. All right. And as the water comes out of that spigot, we're going to call that your income. All right. So let's say that you don't plug the drain. So when the water comes out of the spigot, it comes into the tub, some of it goes down the drain. The water coming down the drain, those are your expenditures. All right. The water coming out of the tap, that's your income. Now, if the volume of water coming out of the spigot is larger than the volume of water that's going down the drain, you'll see that the water level in the bathtub will start to rise up. All right. So the way we want to think about this, the water coming out of the spigot, that is your current income. The water releasing itself or going out of the bathtub down the drain, those are your expenditures. Now, once again, if the water level starts to rise up, that's your wealth. All right. So there's a distinction between your income and your wealth. And so for today, what we're going to do is that we're going to focus only on income right now. Okay. So let's think about current income for the poor. Now, as for the poor, their income, well, it's small. All right, so we're talking about $2 a day, $5 a day, $7 a day, things like that. It's also irregular. So let's go through a 5-day work week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So in terms of the poor, they could get $2 on Monday, $0 on Tuesday, $5 on Wednesday, $7 on Thursday, maybe another $2 on Friday. So their income is actually irregular. It's also unpredictable. In other words, it's already small. $2, but it could be they get $2 a Tuesday this week, but they don't get another source of income till next week or the week after that, or maybe a month. And that could be like only $5. Now, so for the poor, their current income is small, it's irregular, and it's unpredictable. Now, as far as you and me, it's large. Our income is large relative to the poor. On top of that, it's regular. So, for example, I get paid twice a month, and I get to pay the same amount twice a month. All right. So in other words, I get the same amount of income coming in on the second week of the month and the last week of the month. So that's regular. All right. It's also predictable. Once again, I get paid twice a month, every month, 12 months out of the year. So my flow of income is predictable. Now, it's even if your income is small, if your income was predictable and regular, you can build a good economic life around that. Okay. However, for the poor, we're going to see here once again, their income is small, irregular, and unpredictable. So why does this dichotomy exist between their income and our current income? Well, the fundamental answer is that the poor do not have access to long-term salaried labor. So when I talk about salaried labor, what I'm talking about here is that I am on salary. So for example, I'm an associate professor at the University of Mary Washington, all right? I get paid a salary. So that means, and I know Dr. Mellinger's here and he's my boss. It means that basically some days if I don't show up, I still get paid. I'm not on the clock. I don't punch in, punch out. I don't do hourly wages, things like that. I am salaried. So no matter what I do, I'm getting paid. That's awesome, all right? So the thing is that those who are poor, they don't have a lot of access to salaried labor that is long-term, all right? In other words, indeed, on top of that, not only am I salaried, I can count on having this job year-round. And indeed, I'm tenured. That's another great benefit of being a university professor is that, I can't get fired. Even if Dr. Mellinger is upset with my presentation today, he cannot fire me, which is awesome, all right? It makes my life very predictable in terms of my economic life, all right? Now, as far as the poor, they don't have that luxury whatsoever. They're not salaried, they don't have tenure, and their employment is not guaranteed. And the question is, why do they not have access? Why are those who are poor do not have access to this type of employment? One, discrimination is a big issue. Second is that there's a lack of legal rights. Third is low quality public services. It could be they don't have access to subways. It could be they don't have access to reliable bus services to get them from their community into the downtown area where they can actually seek employment on a regular basis. There's also unequal access to education, all right? The other thing is there's intimidation and there's violence. And a lot of poor, I'm going to be careful about saying a lot, but usually there's a strong association between significant poverty and disorder. So my students and I worked in Honduras for over a decade, and our clients were poor. And one of the reasons they were poor is that they were in a small community that was remote or separate from the downtown area. So they didn't have access to buses. That's one reason they couldn't get employment. The second is that there were violent gangs within their community. And this creates a lot of disruption in their lives. And so the idea is that they wanted to create like a roadside stand to sell goods or things like that. Other customers may not come to the community because they know that it's not the safest place to work. So therefore their ability to generate income is actually limited in that way. Okay, so we have here is that so what ends up happening is that we have the poor, they have the same expenditures as us. However, their income is small, irregular, and unpredictable. So what this does it creates these mismatches, all right? In other words, a mismatch is simply the situation where your expenditures, they outstrip your income. All right. Now, you and I, we sometimes deal with mismatches as well. The poor, they deal with them more often. And so the question becomes, well, how do we, the poor and us included, how do we resolve these mismatches if they ever occur? All right. So for the poor, let's take a look at this. So a few things they do, they go without, they don't need. That's one way to deal with it. The second thing, they sell off assets. So for example, it could be a sewing machine, it could be a moped, it could be a piece of equipment that's used, it could be like a nail gun or a welding machine, something like that. If there's a mismatch, they can sell off that asset to get cash into the household, which is good to cover the mismatch. However, the long-term consequences of that action is that that's a productive asset that generates income for them. And so if they do sell it off, then their future income is going to drop or go to zero because they no longer have the sewing machine, the moped, or the welding machine. So they can't go out and they can't generate current income. All right. Another thing the poor can do is that they can engage in what's called informal financial intermediation. All right. So don't be, that's it's a long phrase, but bottom line here, when I say informal financial intermediation, what that means is like, I say if I'm poor and I need, there's a mismatch I'm trying to cover and that mismatch is equal to like $5. I just simply need $5. I can go to a family, a friend or neighbor. It's not going to, hey, I need $5. That's informal intermediation. I can go to my employer, say, can I get an advance? I'm short this week. Can you give me an advance and I'll pay you back next week? Another is I can go to a local shop. All right. So for example, if I can't pay for food, I can go to a local grocery store and I can say, hey, you know what? can't pay for the milk and bread this week. Can you front me and I'll pay you back next week? That's one way to do it. The other is I can go to a money lender. All right. So a money lender is just a private individual in the community who is relatively wealthier than other people, and they have the wherewithal and the willingness and the ability to actually lend out small sums of money. Now, in exchange for lending that out, they're going to charge an exorbitant interest rate. But that's one way to sort of deal with the mismatch is if you're poor, is that you go to a private money lender. The other is the savings clubs, which are awesome, which we don't have time to talk about, but savings club like a Rosca, these are really incredible mechanisms that communities create to sort of like deal with these mismatches. All right, now, let's think about you and me. Like whenever we have a mismatch, our expenditures are greater than our current income, what do? Well, some of us go without. All right, that happens. Some of us do sell off assets, and some of us do engage in informal financial intermediation. We do turn to family and friends and things like that. But for the most part, we don't. The reason why is that we have what's called formal financial intermediation. That's a fancy word for just saying we can go to a bank. All right, we have banks. All right, so that means that we're talking about we go to a bank, we have a savings account, so we can draw down our savings account if there's a mismatch. We have debit cards. We have credit cards from banks, or we actually just go to the bank and get a bank loan to cover the mismatch. Now, what separates basically the poor from us is that the poor do not have access to banks. That's it. There's a number of reasons for this. One, like in Honduras, our clients were remote. It was just too costly and time consuming to go to the bank. The other is that they didn't have formal identification. A lot of them were displaced by a hurricane. So therefore they lost all their identification, all their papers and things like that. So they weren't able to open up an account. And if you look around the world, that's a major issue for a lot of poor people all over the world, which is they don't have the formal state-sponsored identification papers or ID to open up an account. Okay, now let's talk a little bit then about this idea of financial intermediation and why it's so valuable. Well, one is that, for us, we're talking about credit cards, debit cards, savings accounts, things like that. They're great. Think about it. I mean, they help us manage our basic needs. If we are short one day, we put on a credit card, we still get to eat. All right. We get 3 meals a day, every single day for the most part, because we can put on a credit card. I mean, not all of us, I'm not going to say that, but having access to savings account, debit cards, credit cards, it allows us for the most part to put food on the table for our families. And that is an incredible, incredible thing to be able to do for your loved ones. All right. The second, it helps us deal with risks. All right. So for example, if I'm in a household and my son, who is 16 and plays soccer, gets hurt unexpectedly, then I have to take him to get a cast on his arm or something like that. That's an unexpected medical expense coming into my household. Let's say that I don't have the cash for that right now. So what I can do, I can put on a credit card. I can deal with this risk, and it helps me, just helps me cover it. Third is that it helps me raise what are called lump sums of money. So for example, if I am an individual in a poor community and there's a job that opens up for me, however, I need, let's say, a particular piece of equipment to actually perform the job. Let's say it could be a welding gun, whatever that is. I'm not even sure it's called a welding gun or a tool. See, this is what I'm a professor. I wish I was in the crafts and the trades, but so let's say that how about we just go with a nail gun. All right. So let's say I need a nail gun to perform my job, and my boss say, hey, you provide the nail gun. And if you have it, I'll hire you. All right. So the nail gun's expensive though. So that would require me, let's say, to come up with like $200. All right. That's a lump sum. Now I may not have that right away, but I could go to a bank and say, hey, can you lend me $200 so that I can buy the nail gun? Because once I have the nail gun, I can get this job. Once I have this job, I have income flowing into my house. All right. So that's why banks are important to us. They help us in banks. And I think about their services like credit cards, debit cards, savings accounts, and things like that. They help us do these 3 things. All right. Now, once again, as far as the poor do not have access to banks like we do. So the poor have to turn to informal financial intermediation. All right. So think about some of the benefits and some of the drawbacks of this, basically going to friends and family and neighbors and money lenders. The bottom line, well, the benefits are that, if you only need $2 or $1 or $3, you can go to family and friends and you can get that from them. With informal financial intermediation, the lending of small sums, like a few bucks, that happens all the time. A bank will not do that. A bank will not lend you a small sum like $5, $25, or $50. All right, it's not going to happen. The second is that when you do say you're in need of a loan to cover a mismatch, and you do get that loan, usually it's interest free. All right, so if I go to a neighbor and I say, hey, I'm like, hey, Bob, I just need $10. It's it's Monday, I need $10 to get me and my family through the week. On Friday, I will pay you back the $10. And Bob's like, hey, here's $10. Just give me $10 on Friday, no interest at all. Now, for a money lender, that would be different. Money lender's like, hey, if you pay me back $10 at the end of the week, I want 12, 2 for my, the services, paying for things like that. All right. But for the most part, we'll find that with informal financial intermediation, the loans are small and they're interest free. They're also convenient. I just go next door to Bob. All right. And he's there. And I'm like, hey, thank God, Bob, you're here. The other is that they're flexible. So once again, it's Monday, I need $10. I go to Bob and I'm like, hey, Bob, I just need $10. And let's say I'm going to pay him back. I say, Bob, I'll pay you back on Friday for the $10. Let's say Friday comes, I'm still in a tight spot. I can't pay it back. And Bob's usually pretty cool. He's like, hey, how about Monday? All right. So it's pretty flexible. Good. So those are all the benefits of informal financial intermediation. Now, what are some of the drawbacks? One is that it's unreliable. And the reason why is that if I'm poor in my community, more than likely my neighbors are poor. And if I'm in need of $5 or $10 or $7, and I'm knocking around doors, they're usually the same people in my community. They're also in need of that money as well, probably. And so it may not be there for me. So when I need a small sum, I may not be able to get a small sum. The second is that informal financial intermediation lacks privacy. If I go to Bob next door, let's say Bob talks to his neighbor, and the bottom line, everybody knows I need $10, and it doesn't feel good. The third is that it lacks transparency. So instead of going to Bob, let's say I go to my employer, I say, can you give me a cash advance? It's Monday, I just need $10 to give me through the week. I'll pay you back on Friday. It could be that's my employer and I, we agree to that. However, let's say Wednesday comes up and my employer is like, hey, that $10 I gave you on Monday, I told you you can give me back on Friday. I need it today. And the thing is that my employer and I, we did not write these things down, and we did not both sign a document, and this document or contract cannot be enforced by a court of law. So therefore, whoever lends me the money can change the terms on me. So they lack transparency. All right. So what we get here is that what ends up happening is that the poor confront what is called a triple whammy. One, their income is small. Two, this income, this cash flow into the household is irregular and unpredictable. Three, informal financial intermediation is simply not enough for them. They don't have access to banks, and the informal financial intermediation doesn't help them cover their mismatches. So the question is, well, why is this triple whammy so important? Why should we be concerned about it? Well, one is that health emergencies such as COVID-19 can turn into economic emergencies. I talked about that a little earlier. So let's say that someone in my household becomes sick with COVID. I got to pay for medicine. I have to start working and take care of them. If I'm drawing down the current income, maybe that this creates my expenditures get so big, my current income is slowing down, and I had this mismatch. And so to cover the mismatch, to help take care of them, to give them the care they need, or to pay for their medication, I'll have to sell off an economic asset, such as a sewing machine, a moped, or a nail gun. And if I do that, once again, I'm able to cover the mismatch, but I give up the opportunity. Basically my future income is now diminished because I no longer have access to the moped or the sewing machine or the nail gun to generate current income. The second is that you can lose out economic opportunities. All right. The bottom line, once again, if you don't have a lump sum of money to get the nail gun, to take advantage of the job that's open for you, you lose that job. You can't take advantage of it. The third is that they must rely on family, friends, and neighbors. And so this can be a source of significant shame, anxiety, and a loss of pride and dignity. All right. So one of the ways that we can actually go about addressing this triple whammy is with cash transfers, all right? And indeed, we're going to talk about unconditional cash transfers. Now, unconditional cash transfer programs, they have been studied all over the world. And we want to do it. These are some of the benefits that have been, some of the conclusions from these studies show these are the benefits that show up from these cash transfer programs. One is that they found that, they reduce poverty for those who participate in the programs. Second is that having access to unconditional cash transfer programs increases the food security in the household. When we're talking about food security, that is, basically parents are able to put 3 meals a day on their kids' plate each day of the week. That's awesome. All right. The third is that it helps households build out assets. So here, once again, we're talking about that moped, talking about the sewing machine, talking about the nail gun, all right? And those assets help them generate income that is larger and possibly more stable in the future. The fourth is that they help cultivate human capital. When we talk about human capital, there's capital such like machines, like the nail gun, the moped, and the sewing machine. And there's also human capital. That is your education, how much you know, how many years of schooling you have. And so we found that households who have access to unconditional cash transfer programs or who were participants in these programs ends up that their kids, the level of education household rises up. The other thing we see here is that these programs heighten dignity and autonomy. You can imagine that, because instead of having to go to Bob next door to get helped out for my $10 that I can't pay, I have this program I can participate in. All right. It also reduces intimate partner violence. All right. So now, having said that, there are a number of myths surrounding unconditional cash transfer programs. There's 6 of them, in fact. And what we're going to do is that we're going to cover 3 of them. The other 3 are covered in the assigned reading, so I'll leave those to you. All right. Let's take a look at these right here. So with respect to the unconditional cash transfer programs, one myth is that these programs encourage higher spending on alcohol and tobacco. Now, the bottom thing is that, so we have participants in the program, and some of the critics of these programs say, well, if you just give cash to households without any conditions whatsoever attached to the receiving of the cash, they're just going to spend it on tobacco and alcohol and gamble it away. Now, a study in Lesotho has found that actually, households, individuals in these households participating in these programs results in lower spending on alcohol and tobacco, while there's more spending on food. And some argue that this is due in part to the fact that if you are a participant in these programs, you have cash coming in on a regular basis. It is predictable. It's a certain level, the same level every single time. And this reduces anxiety and stress in a household. And some of us, when the way some of us reduce our anxiety and stress is that we smoke and drink. All right. So if that stress goes down, then, less smoking and drinking. And that's good. All right. Now, let's go to myth number 2. Some argue that, well, these participants in these programs will basically just consume the whole amount of cash. So if there's a program giving you $50 a month each month, some argue that, some believe that this $50 is fully consumed, because part of the objective of the program is to create conditions where families can make investments in productive assets such as sewing machine, moped, the nail gun, things like that. And so there was concern that, having guaranteed $50 per month every month, that would just be fully consumed and there'd be no investment. And actually, this has not been the case. In a number of studies in Ghana, Kenya, Lesotho, Malawi, and Zambia, they found that participants in these programs end up investing more and more in human capital. All right, so you see, so that's another myth that's debunked. All right, let's go to myth number 3 then. All right. Another myth with these programs is that these transfers create dependency, reduce participation in productive work. The bottom line is, you're getting $50 per month, why work? All right. Now, what they find is that for the most part, this is not what they're seeing. In fact, the evidence by the programs are saying that, participants in these programs actually do not reduce their labor supply. All right. Now, once again, these are just 3. There's 6 altogether, and those other 3 are in the reading that is assigned. However, you'll see here that there's more and more, since COVID-19, there are more and more of these cash transfer programs popping up. Yeah, I live in Richmond, Virginia right now, and there's one going on in Richmond, Virginia right now. There's one in Oakland going on right now. Of course, it's not $50 or $100. We're talking about $1,000 per month, but there's more and more of these programs popping up. There's more and more studies, so we're going to learn more about the impact of these programs on those who participate in them. And so I encourage you to take a look at some of these readings as well. And beyond that, if you're interested in issues surrounding poverty, what we can do to engage those who are ensnared in poverty trap in a way that's dignified and mutually beneficial, reach out to me. This is sort of my go-to place. And so, and beyond that, any interest, just reach out to me anytime. All right. So thank you so much for having me today. It was really awesome being able to present these ideas with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Humphrey. That was really fascinating. And we've got lots of questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to start off with the first question, which is, how do you think taxing wealth instead of income might change poverty in America?
Oh, I mean, people, come on, take it easy on me. I mean, oh, geez. Honestly, that is way outside my area. And I feel like if I step into that territory, I want to step into it, but please know that we have boundaries to our knowledge, and I'm like stepping outside that. And so hold on, I need a drink from this mug right here first. All right, I hope you all know Gumby. I know I'm dating myself a little bit, but he's not happy with that question either. So anyway, I think when it comes to the taxation of wealth, and once again, there's better people to answer this question than I am. One thing that we are concerned about is intergenerational poverty and also intergenerational wealth. And so in that case, if there's a taxation of wealth, then it does sort of limit the ability of someone in their family who is wealthy, let's say in 1940, to continue to sort of build that wealth through the generations, through the decades. Because it becomes, we talk about what are called vicious cycles, and poverty is considered a vicious cycle. So if you are fatigued and you are stressed, then you're less likely to be able to get hired for a job. So therefore your current income goes down, and therefore you can't build wealth in the bathtub. There's also what are called virtuous cycles. The bottom line is that if you're wealthy, you can make additional investments in things that make you more productive, more attractive for the labor market, and therefore, basically increase your current income higher and higher, and therefore increase your wealth more and more. So that's a virtuous effect where, we heard this thing called the rich get richer. That's what I'm talking about. So in that case, when it comes to taxation of wealth, it could be that's a way in which to sort of like, how would I say, maybe tap down, pump the brakes a little bit on the rich getting richer. All right. So it's almost like, in Halloween, the rich kids have the best costumes. And so they get more candy than the rest of us. That's the rich getting richer. All right. A simple example. All right. Next question, easy, please. It is my summer.
Sorry, we took all the easy questions out. Yeah. So okay, the next one is from Sandy, who evidently has some experience working with the homeless for many years, and she tells a story of some homeless getting some stability through an opportunity to stay in a hotel for a period of time rather than living on the streets. And so let me just read this to you. That little bit of stability took a lot of stress out of their lives and gave them a place to sort of recover, revive a little bit and actually prosper a little bit. And so I guess the question is, are there payment alternatives, things like PayPal, Venmo, for instance, to present to folks with low bars to provide more access to them that could help them through their poverty or through their lifestyle that would help them in a similar kind of way? I mean, what are your thoughts on this? You're somebody who knows an awful lot about poverty. So,
I think it's a great question because what it brings up is the issue of technological access in terms of if these cash transfer programs are a direct deposit into a pre-existing bank account. That means you would have to have that bank account. Or if it is a mobile phone deposit, you would actually have to have a mobile phone. Those are two
Right.
things that if you are someone who is homeless, more than likely you don't have a bank account. If you are homeless, more than likely you don't have a mobile phone, or maybe you do. But these are so in many ways the programs are limited in their scope to reach certain segments of the population because certain segments may not have the logistical or the technological capability to actually access the programs. So I think it's an incredible question. I do not know whether or not they exist, but I do think that would be a great place to make a contribution to the set of programs, which is how do you design a program for someone who is homeless, who may not have a bank account, may not have a mobile phone, and indeed they may not have their identification papers. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that there are some programs out there. I would assume they're pretty small scale, but I think that that is really valuable work, because the issue is, how do we get more and more people access to these stabilizing forces to help them move out of, and sometimes this is a transitional moment. Homelessness can be transitional. So you bounce down for a little bit. So how can we help them bounce back out?
Yeah.
Okay, our next question comes from a 2008 graduate of Mary Washington, Katie Morrow. And Katie.
How are you, Katie? I can't believe you're on there, Katie. How are you? Sorry, I know you can't respond. I'm sorry.
I'm sure that she is giving you a shout out right now. But she has a question about the pandemic, given the amount of people in the US who lost their jobs. Do you think that in general, it's kind of shifted opinions among US citizens to recognize how vulnerable much of the population is to not having a regular income to rely on? Or do you think that all of us who were able to rely on our salaried or hourly jobs throughout the pandemic, maybe we just continue to ignore the vulnerability that exists in our society?
Oh, great. And I think there has been a bit of a shift in terms of the way that we think about government and the role of government in our lives since the pandemic. And I think back to sort of like, there's this great PBS documentary about the Reagan Thatcher years, where there was a shift in both of our economies towards a more sort of smaller government mindset. And it's interesting, in some ways it feels like we're sort of moving back to sort of like, okay, maybe we're more welcome and more welcoming of the idea of government having more and more roles in our lives as these stabilizing forces. And I think also looking at the comparison and how certain countries, in particular the Nordic countries, handled the pandemic, and also handled in terms of like the disruption to their economies and their citizens' well-being. And I also just think that there's this younger generation coming up, and they're much more readily sort of like, yeah, we do want these stabilizing forces. At the same time, I think it's also heightened polarization in our country as well, because the idea of big government, that's really not a good word or phrase for some people to hear. And I would admit, I mean, I grew up very conservative in my household. Big government, we didn't say that. You got put in time out if you said big government. But I do think that there has been a transition. And I think in some ways part of it is due to the fact that the shock was ever present, and it impacted a lot of people, not all of us, but enough of us to sort of have a shift maybe in our approach to the role of government in our lives. I welcome commentary from the other speakers if you have any, Keith or Betsy.
Yeah. It's out of my league. Dr. Humphrey, I don't know if you know anything about cryptocurrency. There's a question about cryptocurrency, and I think about cryptocurrency every morning because I see ads for it all the time. It's exploded. It's just exploded in the last year. Can you say anything about how this has impacted the economy during COVID-19? If cryptocurrency didn't exist, would anybody notice? I mean, what can you tell us about the impact of cryptocurrency?
I would say, I really can't speak to it all. Mm-hmm. I will say that I think it holds out a lot of promise when it comes to the logistics of what we were talking about earlier with respect to allowing more individuals to have access to programs like these. One of the things that holds back the sort of like scale of these programs is the logistical expense associated with sort of like trying to figure out who's eligible. And once you figure out who's eligible, how do you get the actual transfer to them? And I can see sort of cryptocurrency possibly being used as a low-cost mechanism by which to distribute the transfer programs. And I've also heard of other advancements in technology where it's going to be, we are going to, I'm losing my There's a way in which, right now, a big thing we talked about earlier was the idea that there's a number of poor people who don't have access to their identification papers. There's emerging technology that is allowing people to have a universal sort of like, it's something, this is the problem. When as professors, when we move into spaces outside of our own, this is what happens. So I will say whatever I have said, you take it with a grain of salt, and you check my sources. So I think I'm going to stop there until if that word comes back to me, I will come back to this question. But yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't say it. Cryptocurrency is exciting, Bitcoin, all that stuff. I have not ventured into that space.
It is. I never heard anything at all about it until, the last, I guess, year or so. And now it seems like I hear about it every day. So yeah, it's exciting.
I do know there's a professor, a friend of mine, Stephen Greenlaw, who is a macroeconomist, who would be able to speak a lot about cryptocurrency probably. so maybe you're into his discussion group.
Yeah, that's a nice transition.
It is.
Yeah, funny you should bring up your colleague, Steve Greenlaw, because he's got a question for you. And his question is, it has to do with the evidence for cash transfers that you presented tended to be more global examples. So is there comparable evidence for the US, and why should we expect similar results?
I would say there's not similar evidence in the United States. However, there's more programs that are actually being launched and being studied. And one of the drawbacks of the current programs is just that they're small in scale. So the question about whether or not if something works in Oakland, can the results of that program be replicated in other cities? That's an open question. It could be just a contextual result of sort of circumstances in Oakland that it is a success. So right now, I would say that some of the links I added at the end of the presentation, those link out to those sort of most recent studies in the United States. I would say as far as the other evidence that's global, cash transfer programs have been going on in Mexico and Brazil for like a few decades now. And so as economists, we tend to be drawn to the data. And so there's more data readily available in Brazil and Mexico and other countries. We do our work there. And I would say right now in the United States, that data is just starting to show up.
Thanks.
So can you say a little bit about other forms of similar kinds of aid? You were talking about cash transfer programs, but there are similar kinds of programs where you provide free food, provide free clothing,
Yes.
free. I mean, can you compare and contrast these? Is one more effective in combating the actual issue than others? What are your thoughts on cash transfer versus other kinds of transfer of aid?
I would say that, so for example, we could go with the food aid program where there's a district like USAID does this as well. And there is evidence to suggest that sometimes this can be a distortion to local markets. So for example, if we're running a food aid program in, let's say, Lesotho, instead of a cash transfer program as a way to support the population or the citizens who are materially poor, if USAID comes in with a number of foodstuffs, essentially what ends up happening is that our food stuff, which is delivered from the United States to Lesotho, is going to compete with local food stuff. The thing is, our food stuff is free. So it's very difficult to compete with free. So if you are a local vendor of local food stuff in Lesotho and USAID is coming in with a bunch of stuff, you're not going to win. And indeed, what's going to happen is that you will most likely go out of business. So you'll lose your current income, and all those people who work for you will lose their current income as well. So there's lots of unintended consequences that are associated with sort of like donating used clothing. So for example, take Tom's shoes. So people love Tom's shoes because for every pair that you buy, he's going to run off to Brazil or Honduras and slide a nice pair of Toms on this poor kid who runs barefoot. First of all, we all should be barefoot more often. That's just the way we should be as human beings. All right. The second of all, once again, local shoe vendors, they can't compete with Toms. All right, and the third thing is that it puts forward, especially the Tom story, it puts forward this narrative that an outsider, in this particular, this white, good-looking Southern California outsider can parachute in and solve problems by slipping on free shoes. And the bottom line is that movement from poverty to prosperity for a community is a complex, long-term, historically anchored process that takes decades. We can't get around that. And so these cash transfer programs, they're not going to solve poverty, but they will ameliorate the immediate conditions of poverty for individual households. So if I can put food on the table, which allows my kid to sit in class for long durations where I can pay for more schooling for my child, I'm seeing the long-term projection of sort of like, okay, how do I move my child into a better situation than I was? Yeah. Does that answer it?
Yeah. Actually, I want to follow up on that. Because one of the other questions that's in the Q&A, it's a little farther down, was about the skills of the poor. And I think you were sort of touching on that too. Moving people out of poverty, seems to me, sometimes requires, education too, right? And I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, the question, let me just make sure I get the question that was asked was, what about the relative lack of marketable skills among the poor? Isn't that part of the cause of poverty?
Yes, it is. And I think there's this tension because we have, in our society, we have been sort of programmed. So we have this whole thing, teach a man to fish. We all know that one, right? That's the exit out of poverty. And I think, and it's more complicated than that. It's not like I can jet off to Honduras and start teaching marketable skills to Hondurans. And then all of a sudden they'll find a transition out of poverty. It's almost like there's a movement, and this is where with the Sidekick Manifesto is moving our thinking from the hero's narrative, which is that we have all this abundant wealth around us. We must be doing something right. So all we got to do is teach the other people who don't have our stuff how to do what we do. And that's the narrative that we've been trained in. I guess let's go back to Ronald Reagan. I guess not. I mean, because I remember, how old am I in Ronald Reagan's time? All I know is I'm holding hands with my mom and we're doing hands across America. Did anyone else do that back in the day? And the idea is that by holding hands across America, by showing we were going to end hunger. I think it was Ethiopia, right? And that narrative has been given to us that all we have to do as Americans is step up and, donate or go abroad and teach marketable skills to the poor, and then they're going to move out. It is so much more complex than that. And there's this movement now to more of a localized, like how can we support local individuals? There's local nonprofits, there's local leaders in these communities who are trying to fight poverty like we think we are. And our job is to actually support their work that they're already doing because they have the contextual knowledge. They speak the language, they know the culture, they vote in the elections. There's all kinds of things that they are anchored into the local context that we will never be. And they know better than we do a possible path out. And so our job is simply not to transfer our skills and knowledge, but to come in and say, well, we do have some things like that maybe we can provide, but we will take a backseat role and we'll listen to what you have to, how can we support your work here? And so I'm not sure how much time I have, but this sort of goes back to like when my students and I first went to Honduras, we did an improved cook stove program. The idea is that, there were traditional cook stoves in the households and the communities that we're working with. And if we transition from a traditional stove with all the smoke and the carcinogenics and things like that to a clean stove, then there'd be fewer healthcare expenses, more income available to invest in education for their kids, and there'd be a trajectory out of poverty. And so we did that program. We did like 25 stoves, took out traditional stoves, put in improved cook stoves, and we came back a year later to study the results. And most of the new stoves are outside rusting, because the plancha, which is this little thing you cook your tortillas on, was so tiny the households couldn't use it, so they went back to their traditional stoves. So that's the localized knowledge that we do as outsiders don't have. And that's why we need to be more deferential in our approach to this. And Yeah, I mean, it's an intense conversation because I feel like we have this program in us that says that we have the answers, because I know I have that sort of instinct in me, and I have to fight it all the time. Just sort of say, no, 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 I'm a psychic, I'm a sidekick, I'm a sidekick. That's it. How can I help in my role here? My ego wants me to be the hero, but you know.
So the next question is kind of bringing it back to the pandemic.
Okay.
If the research shows that stipends do not increase dependency, why do we now have so much concern about unemployment benefits decreasing the available workforce?
Oh, I think, because as an economist, what we do is that we always think about the incentives. So whenever there's a program in front of us, what we do, and this is, I'm going to sort of like speak highly about economists right now. So what we do is that we're considered apolitical in the sense that whether it's Democrats or the Republicans bring forward a program to put forward for a new public policy, whether it could be heightened unemployment benefits or a cash transfer program, our job as an economist is to go out and find the best model to study it and the best data to help test that model. And if the conclusions from using that model and that data lead us to believe that on net, the benefits of this program outweigh the cost of the program, because we cannot avoid any cost. As economists, we have this thing called opportunity cost. Whenever you take an action, you must give something up. So every program will have its costs associated for us. The only thing we're concerned about as economists is that on net, is the return positive? Now, if the return is positive for this program, then we put our full weight behind and say, yes, this should go forward, all right? So Republicans and Democrats, they really don't, well, they don't trust us because they know we'll flip depending upon the model and also on the data. So all you youngins out there, this is why econ is an awesome field and you should totally, enroll in economics because we give you the economic way thinking that no one else does, all right? So, and econometrics too. And the other thing, so I would say coming back to that is that if we, with the additional unemployment and the idea of reducing and the number of people working, of course, I'm like, yeah, that's people respond to incentives. And if you're getting paid more to be at home than in the workplace, especially in the conditions of a pandemic where it's quite possible that you can get sick, of course I'd stay home too. And so as an economist, I'm like, it's possibly an unintended consequence of the program of these guaranteed additional unemployment benefits, but looking at it, yeah, that's people respond to incentives. So I think in many ways, what you want to do is that, coming back to the question, is that yes, that could, or that will be a result of a cash transfer program. That's a cost of the program. The question is, what are the benefits of the program? Now, does it reduce stress? Does it lead to an increase in you investing in your education? Does it allow you to get childcare so you can make sure that your kids are taken care of? If all these things are yes, 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 and on net, they're pushing you more into the labor force than the sort of like getting paid and you want to stay home part, then on net, you're going to go get work. The question is, how do you design the program, the details, with sort of like a behavioral sort of like framework to sort of try to figure out and tease out on net, what will the result be? So yes, cash transfer programs could lead some people to say, yeah, I'm just going to sit home and take my cash. That's just a straight up human response to that. There's no way to get around that. But there's all these other forces saying, get back into the workplace. So on net, we got to figure out which one dominates the other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you obviously have thought a lot about poverty over the years and know a lot about it. What if you were in charge? What would you have, or how would you have handled poverty and the poor during the pandemic, dealing with job loss, trouble paying for necessities, that sort of things? What ideas would you have?
Oh, geez.
I might have to think about that one a bit.
That's a good question. That is a good question, because I think about, Andrew Yang, when he was running for the primaries, Democratic primaries, put forward the universal basic income idea, and it's been around, but his pursuit, he's really sort of popularized this universal basic income. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm a Democrat or Republican. That's not my job as a professor. I mean, I'm just saying I know this person has brought forward this idea. And so in some ways, that is pretty enticing, this idea of a universal basic income, in the sense of, there's a foundation level that every single American citizen is guaranteed a certain level of basically quality of life. And once again, we'll see that we come back to that earlier discussion I had, is that if there is a universal basic income, yeah, some people are just going to say, hey, I'm just not going to, I'm not going to work. And I'll just sort of take my universal basic income per month. And some people may drop out of the workplace as well. And I think about, and one of the things I've always thought about is the idea of like, is that necessarily bad that let's say my household, I have one son and my wife and I both work. Let's say that one of us decided to stop working because we could, and then just invest fully in raising this human. I mean, that could be a good thing if like all these American households are saying, okay, one of us can stay home and raise the kids. And of course, that'd be disruptive to the childcare industry and things like that. But there'd also be a transition to other things so. Yeah, that's a huge question that I'm not qualified to answer, but those are some interesting things I think about in terms of like, yeah, I mean, isn't our primary purpose to raise good humans? And so maybe that allows us to do it. I know I'm skipping the pandemic, but all you youngins out there, what I learned long ago is that when you get questions, you answer the question you want, not the question that's asked. And so
that's a debate technique, actually.
Yeah. And if you just talk, I'm just waiting for this clock to run out so I can save myself from Katie Morrow's more questions from Katie Morrow. So I'll take it.
So I'll give you another question. And I think this is one you probably have a lot of experience with. So this is from Alex. Alex Hennish, I think you say his last name. And he's asked you to talk about how an unexpected expense can spiral into homelessness, into poverty and homelessness.
Yeah, I think, a lot of my, so I'm just pausing just because I'm thinking, do I share a story about one of our clients in Honduras when we worked, because we ran a microfinance institution in Honduras, my students and I, for a decade, or do I pull a question, like a context from like my childhood, which I grew up poor, near poor, poor again. And so the reason why I'm interested in issues around poverty is that, when we talked about earlier about going to the grocery store and say, hey, I can't pay for milk and bread, and so can you just give it to us? I actually had to do that when I was a kid, to go walk up to the local store and actually, get food. And then Tom, he was the owner of the grocery store, he'd put our name on a piece of paper and put on the wall and say, Humphrey owes $5. And there was Humphrey stickers all over the back wall. And so the entire community could see that. So I'm sort of interested in that just because, well, that's not a very nice thing to do, but he also gave us free food, so it's hard to tell. So I would say, but if I come back to our clients, so for example, we had a client who ran like a 7-Eleven-esque store out of her home. And she was just doing really well. She got a loan of $25 and $50, then $100, then $200, and then we gave her a $300 loan so she could invest in inventory, in a refrigerator, keep the inventory safe. She actually built a porch on the front of her house and to sort of have people so they could sit down in front of her house and have meals. And as part of a sort of like a benefit, we actually bought a ceiling fan for her, just to sort of like help her get the thing going. But she got so successful that she drew the attention of local gangs. And one night they broke in, tied her and her family up, held them at gunpoint, stole all the inventory, and killed a few of their animals. And then what ended up happening is that she left the community, and that's not an unexpected expense. That's what happens when a lot of poor people live in unsafe places. It's the lack of safety that actually makes them poor. It's not because their poverty doesn't make it unsafe. It's the lack of safety comes first. And that spiraled into her leaving the community and her family dropping into poverty, severe poverty. And then she ended up just had to move, I think, a number of communities away. And so we lost contact with her. And there's so many stories about that, that could be like, people get into the back of trucks to go to work, and there's a bunch of them. Women, children holding their babies, men going off to work, and the roads are not safe. And sometimes we've had clients get bounced out of trucks and, have this unexpected medical expense, like a broken leg. And so they can't work anymore. And they're going to work to get paid, but in the process of going to work, they get hurt. And so they lose their job. They had this unexpected medical expense, they lose the job. We come in with a loan if we can. But then that's just sort of like, there's no food in the house. It's just sort of like kids drop out of school because they go get day jobs, sort of work to bring income into the house. So therefore they're not getting educated. And that's the idea of like that, I don't know, that stabilizing universal basic income could be like a floor. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, some fascinating stories you have. Thank you, Dr. Sean Humphrey. Really appreciate you doing this for us. Great talk, great Q&A. Students, don't forget to log off and join us for the discussion groups, and the continuing students, of course, participate in the discussions on Canvas. Next week, just as a quick preview here, we have on Tuesday, 2 of our faculty in the Department of Political Science and International Affairs, Dr. Rosalind Cooperman and Steve Farnsworth. Some of you may, if you were part of COVID-19 in context, you may remember their presentation from last summer. And they're going to be talking about the federal government and how they struggled to respond to COVID. And then on Thursday, we have Claudine Farrell, Dr. Claudine Farrell, our chair of the Department of History and American Studies, talking about a historical look at how Americans have responded to disasters. So it should be a good week next week, lots of good stuff. And again, thank you, Dr. Humphrey, for joining us, and students, we'll see you soon in the small group discussions. Have a good evening, everybody.